Mic on. There you go.
Oh,
We're
hi.
working.
Uh-huh.
Working. Real professional outfit here, but we're going to make it work. Now, the reason that this is the third go around is that Jess has been working on a special number that she wants to present today on the podcast live. So if you are watching this is your opportunity to go ahead
Uh-huh,
and
uh-huh, uh-huh.
get real close to the camera and see what you can see. Jess, go ahead.
Oh, you're such a dick. Nope, nope, nope. Nope.
Okay. Well, so it is late. It is almost past our bedtime. But we decided we were going to burn the midnight oil and get this done. There is a high possibility that the 5-year-old that is still in our bedroom may call for one of us. So there'll be an awkward silence when one of us leaves, and then the other will have to fill the space. You might be asking yourself, why is there a 5-year-old still in your bedroom? That is a fantastic question. We had a plumbing issue.
I blame
Uh,
Paul.
and
I blame Paul 100%.
probably. It typically par for the course. Um, but in like August or something, had a plumbing issue. They had to cut a hole in the ceiling of her room. She was afraid of the ceiling having a hole in it. She's in a little like mini bed on our floor, and here we are like 8 months later, and that's our permanent resident, I think. So we're working through that. But today, really, what I wanted to talk about is the positive things that change that I haven't necessarily been aware of. I think oftentimes when we are going through life, whatever kind of change, whether you're like, when you're working out, you don't really notice any change until you look at the scale and maybe it's budging, maybe it's not budging. You get kind of frustrated with not making the progress you want. So for me, there's been a handful of things that have improved unrelated to drinking, but happened because I wasn't drinking. Does that sound okay? I gotta ask for approval sometimes.
Yeah, what am I?
So I was in a meeting today, and they were talking about how sobriety looks different for everybody. One guy was sharing his story, and it's pretty tragic as a kid. Basically was saying that he could have left his house as a 12-year-old and for like weeks on end, and his parents would have had absolutely no idea. And then another gal was talking about how she didn't have that situation, but for her, as soon as she had any kind of alcohol at all in her system, she would black out immediately. She would make all kinds of, poor decisions. She would even be drinking at work and, would get called in the manager's office, and the manager would say, "Hey, listen, you did this, this, and this." And she's like, "There's no way I would ever do that." And so, it was really impacting her life. And now that she's sober, she hasn't had those kinds of interactions. And I think those are the easy ones to kind of call out. For me, it's been a lot more on the reactivity side. So I have ADD. I'm not, my medication is gone for the day. So this is all over the place. I'm sorry, but it is.
And I can only do so much to reel him in because I'm tired. So I
Right.
apologize.
And like,
Double.
and like I said, it's close to bedtime. And so if I took medication, then I would be up until 2 or 3 in the morning. And I'm not trying to do that. So but for me, it's like my reactivity. I had an instance yesterday where my boss, and we get along fine, but we had an exchange via text where if I'd been drinking, I turned to Jess and was like, "Man, I'm really thankful that I'm not drinking because the way I would have handled it had I been drinking would have been totally different. I would have said some bullshit and either would have had to try to like cover my tracks and or spin it or
I want to be clear, not necessarily being drunk while responding, like just in
sure,
general,
yeah,
because that is definitely something we've noticed with Paul, or I maybe noticed a little bit more than he did initially was, once he stopped drinking, even the times that he wasn't drinking, he was still, reactive when he would respond to things, wouldn't really maybe think things through as much. It was really easy to pass the blame onto anybody else but himself, which it kind of becomes this habit, I feel like, that people do sometimes with any sort of like alcohol, drug related, well, actually, and just in general, but in this particular case for Paul, there was like a distinct difference between when he stopped drinking and, being reactive to maybe boss, manager, whatever, and kind of having this like sob story of why he didn't do the thing.
Yeah, I mean, especially like, yesterday, it would have been easy to just kind of sound off and be like, well, you don't understand what I'm saying because of XYZ reasons, and just kind of be a dick trying to get my point across. And you can't do that with your manager, even if I'm right, which I am. But and I can't recall because I don't do notes with this thing, so I don't have anything to reflect back on. But I think that this is the conversation that you and I had was here probably, I don't know, it's probably been a year ago. Jess points out, she's like, man, like you don't complain or blame anymore. One, I never realized that I was a complainer or blamer, and so that was news to me. And then
Yeah.
secondly, was that the more I got to thinking about it, the more I realized that that was exactly what I would do. Whether it was, because I would have a routine. I would go into town. Um, I'm like 3 hours away from the majority of the accounts I see for work. I would get my work done. I would go and hang out with friends. We'd, you know, drink and hang out. And then in the morning, I'd be hungover. And I've been doing my job for long enough to where I felt like I had the freedom, if you will, to oh, I'll skip this thing or I'll push that off or whatever. And Jess is like, "What are you doing?" And then I'd get defensive or try to explain my way out of it. And really, it was I was hungover. I didn't get my job done, and I don't do that anymore. And I don't do that with a lot of things. I don't, if there's something that I've done, I try to apologize for it or take ownership of something. And I think that's something that, regardless of whether you're, an addict,
Hmm.
taking ownership of your own shit is something that people don't do. And that's something that I've definitely learned through it. For me, AA, it's 12 steps. And while at the core, it's working towards sobriety, it is also, drinking is just a portion of that program.
Well, and
Um,
initially when you're doing that, when we were first kind of getting together the first couple of years, for me as the spouse, I was kind of justifying it as well. Like, all right, there's so much you do, when you're home. Paul's extremely helpful and is really a true partner when it comes to being a dad and being a spouse. You
so
know,
good looking. Don't, don't be so quick to
I
agree.
told you I was a personality person,
I
right?
know.
Like I
So
wasn't in
much
it for,
personality.
yeah, yeah. I'm not a looks person, so that definitely wasn't the first thing that hit me when I met you.
Thank you.
It took a while. It took a bit for me to get there with him. A lot of
A
pursuing, a
lot of
lot of me
darkness.
going, a lot of our relationship was through text in the beginning. That
That's right.
really helped
I know.
that I didn't have to look at you
Thank you.
initially, but now, love, is blind, right? As they say, which I truly can say that with every ounce of my being.
I will be weeping into my pillow tonight.
Hey, you started it. But yeah, so I mean, for me, I was like, okay, Paul, I know having, he took my older two girls kind of under his wing. It's a lot coming into. Our lives are a bit chaotic, as anybody with kids knows that it can be that way. And so I was kind of giving him a lot of a bit of a pass. And then the problem is my tolerance for excuses is really fucking low. So at a certain point, I'm like, okay, this has gotten to be ridiculous. Like, I understand every so often, maybe, getting drunk with your buddies and maybe not making it to work. We've all been there. But it was just getting way too consistent for my liking. And excuses to me are a huge turnoff, especially when they become weekly, sometimes
Well, the
daily.
way the way I looked at it and the way I justified it, I guess there was a couple things. Is like I blamed a lot of my faults air quotes faults on my ex and previous relationship, right? Like, and so it was her fault that this didn't happen or I felt this way. And so there's that natural when you get into the new relationship that like things are going to get better. And because you're not her or my life situation is better, you know, the things that were issues then aren't going to be issues now. And so, being a first time dad, stepping into a role with girls that were 6, 8 at the time, and we do share custody. And so, like, when, we would give the girls back, there was almost like a attitude in my mind of like, oh, now I get to take a break, right? Like,
Mhm.
I get to go and like do Paul and, I'm going to go and
Or
hang out
feel
with my
sorry
buddies
for
for a while.
yourself because you're like, oh
Or
man, I'm
like,
just
oh,
like
I
so
just,
stressed out, blah, blah,
yeah.
blah, and it's like, okay, I mean, yeah, it just becomes an excuse to continue the bad behavior you're
Right.
continuing doing.
Well, and it wasn't until quitting drinking that, and this isn't to say that like my ex and I would still be together now. There was plenty of other things outside of drinking that led us to splitting up. But I do think if I'd either scaled back my drinking to a quote unquote normal level, you know, or
Uh,
or or at least thought with a little bit of like intelligence, like we probably wouldn't have gotten married. I probably would have prioritized like, hey, there's some things that aren't lining up. This isn't. I don't see this being like a future, and maybe we would have pulled out earlier, or maybe we could have just been friends and leave it at that. But you know, I heard something here not too long ago that, and I think I've talked about this before, but that your mental maturity ends, or yeah, it ends when you start drinking. So for me, I'm like 18, 19 maybe when I start drinking. So when I start reflecting back on it, like all the decisions and how I responded to things and my quick to anger and those kinds of things, it's like I'm talking to a fucking kid. Like it's like I'm talking to my 14-year-old, and so I started seeing some real consistencies on how I behaved as an adult and how my girls behave now as teens. And there's a lot of similarities there that I didn't realize was like there was almost like a chemical retardation that happened to my brain. It happens to everybody's brain when you start drinking, especially if you start drinking heavy. I can't speak to drugs because I wasn't, but um, there's just so much to it that I was so unaware of because when I decided, hey, I'm gonna stop drinking, like I thought that it was just like the drinking was the issue, and it was, but the th- the areas that improved for me went way beyond just like the drinking portion. Would you agree?
yeah,
I
100%.
can I concur. Yeah, good, good, good.
Um, well, yeah, of course, we've talked about that, a million times. Obviously not.
Was it recorded?
Yeah.
She
It
gone.
probably
She
it
gone.
probably was a couple times and then it got deleted because I think you hate me. You
But
see,
it's
I
not
think
that
I
I
think
hate you.
Paul just is like, you know what, I should have you on my podcast to like make you feel good. Yeah, make you feel wanted. And then he's like, and we actually never recorded that, or it got lost. Bloop.
Lost in the mail. Um, Off topic, but I was talking to a friend of mine today, and every now and again, as friends do, I've known him 20 plus years, and so he is now 40 and has a 40-year-old man body, and sometimes I allegedly refer to him as being fat. And I told him that I can't have fat friends, which may or may not be true. I don't know. That sounds terrible saying it out loud, but he and I were talking today, and we are talking about as you do when you're 40, you start taking on like the world's problems, and we were talking about like the food crisis and all the bullshit that's in food now. And he was saying, look, like I've actually had to go so far to the extreme that like he cut out mushrooms. He was doing a bunch of other drugs. He's cut out drinking. He's cut out sugar.
Wait, hold on.
Um,
Is the extreme that he was doing all these things, or is the extreme that he cut out all these things?
the
Because
extreme is that he cut out all the things
hold on,
because he's like
hold on.
totally like reborn human being right now. And
I
and
love that being extreme is cutting out mushrooms.
well, yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, for
Okay.
him, it was part of his, regular like thing. So anyway, so he cuts out all these things, and his whole thing is like, look, like, I'm 40, and I feel like I'm going to probably have a stroke or a heart attack. And I was like, well, I mean, genetically, you're pretty much predisposed to that kind of a thing. So maybe you should take some responsibility there. And I'm really excited for him because his kids are playing competitive football, and there's a good chance that um his oldest is going to move up fairly quickly within high school and ideally college. And I was like, dude, you're going to feel kind of like an idiot if you keep doing what you're doing and die and he gets in the NFL and you don't ever get to see a game. And so while we're just sitting there like giving each other shit, I was really proud of him for finally, and we'll see how long it lasts. Hopefully, it's forever, but finally getting to a point where it's like, look, I got to take my health a little bit more seriously. I got to start acting like an adult. I want to be present for my kids. And
It'll be interesting to talk to him in a few months if he's
yeah,
able to keep it up and see if him or his wife have noticed changes. It'd be fun to have them both on just to see
for
if
sure.
there's like,
Absolutely.
because definitely with you, there was so many changes that I noticed that you had no idea that had changed.
I'm pretty
Me-
clueless most of the time anyway, but
yeah. Uh-huh.
mhm,
It's putting it nicely.
mhm, mhm. It is my podcast. You have to be nice to me.
Uh, but, but anyway,
Come on,
yeah,
not
but I
that
mean, I
funny.
was surprised. Hey, you know what? I was willing to take you how you were,
Ugly,
even with,
broken.
even with the, imperfections, as you will. So, I mean, it was just a bonus. I was like, oh, look at that. I didn't do too shabby.
Yeah, I turned a corner.
Mm,
It
it
worked
was
out pretty
good.
good.
And I
It's worked
couldn't,
out good.
couldn't be more proud of you. So,
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
mhm.
Well, we won't bore you to death, but I did want to get this on the books. I did do everything thus far technologically correct. So there is a high possibility that people will be able to listen to this.
Oh boy.
Um, the biggest thing I want to leave people with is that at the end of the day, having somebody that can kind of validate the changes that you may not be able to see is super important.
Helpful, yeah. I mean,
I,
some people don't have a person,
they
but
might, and that and
yeah,
and that's where like meetings or counselors
yeah,
or whomever,
trying to find.
having somebody in your corner is hugely helpful. And even if they don't know you that well, if you can be transparent with like, hey, here's some things that I'm struggling with, or here's some things that I'm you know, trying to work on. People pay all kinds of money for online coaches, online therapy, or whatever. The more transparent that you can be about the things that you're struggling with, the more that person can kind of hold you accountable, can give you something like, hey, look, like, remember that thing that you were doing? You're not doing that thing anymore. And like, oh, that's right. I haven't done that in a long time. And it helps you stay motivated. It helps you see that the process is working. Um, and over time, I heard the other day that it takes 2 years for your brain to heal once you quit drinking. 2 years.
Where'd you hear that? Because I thought
Uh,
that
hmm,
I thought it was like 6 months.
that's for your liver.
Um,
Yeah. Yep. That would be Dr. Huberman.
yep, that'd be.
He also has a podcast that is way more famous than mine. He knows way more than I do. I'm just winging it. But that was what I was told by the powers that be about the brain science and the alcohol.
I'm sure you
So
fact checked it too.
absolutely. There will be no fact checking here. Trump has made fact checking not a thing anymore. Him and Elon, thank you. We can just say whatever we want, however we want, and it is fact. So, anyways, if you don't have some kind of accountability partner, find one. Um, if you feel so inclined, reach out to us here at the Addictions Podcast. We are happy to keep you accountable, give you some things to think about. Nobody has taken us up on that, so I don't know how excited people are, but we
Mhm.
are open and available to give you some unbiased,
Oh yeah, my favorite.
yes, unbiased
Unbiased, unsolicitable advice.
advice. Yes,
Yeah, my
absolutely.
favorite. And I'll be here popping my head at every once in a while to
Yeah,
keep this guy accountable.
that's
So,
right. You got it. Got it. One of these days she'll actually subscribe to the podcast. So,
right.
uh,
What's it called again?
I don't know. We've got some good guests coming up here in the next couple of days. So be sure to check those out. You can check us out on social media at the Addictions Podcast on Instagram. We are on Spotify, and have a great evening. We're gonna go get some sleep.